Hey, so welcome to the Name Mentors podcast. I'm stoked to have my very, very, very best cousin, Jenn, on today. And it's a special podcast with a special message. I just felt like having a conversation with Jenn is really important. 2020 blew up mental health conversations, and just the last couple of years as a society, we are really doing such a great job of erasing the stigma around mental health. And so I wanted to have Jenn on here because she has a very special and sacred corner of the mental health world that I feel is super, super relevant to motherhood. So Jenn, thanks for being on my podcast. It makes me feel super special and important.
Well, thank you for having me on. I feel like I'm on with a celebrity. I'm pretty stoked too. I have the coolest cousin. So.
She's talking about me, guys.
Yes, I am.
So, I generally know a little bit, like an umbrella of what you do, but I don't really know what you do. And I actually didn't want to go research it because I wanted to talk to you like anybody else would be talking to you. So do you want to just tell a little bit of your story and how you got into what you do now?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I feel like it's never a quick answer anyway. So I guess that's probably a good fit. The reality is I'm a former first grade teacher. I did that for about 4 years. And then I was a stay-at-home mom for about 4 years. So for really the last 6 years, I have worked for an agency called the Respect Team, and we're a local non-for-profit here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And what we do is we go into schools, so predominantly grades 6 through 12, and we have a whole curriculum and just of respect, right? That's right in the word, but respect of self, respect of others, basically having boundaries in a relationship and what the heck is a boundary. Having just different types of communication, being assertive instead of being passive aggressive, ghosting, because that's what the kids do. They put one another on red. So that's one of the jobs that I do. And I love that. And I've done that for about 6 years. And then I work for the school care team. So again, another local non-for-profit here in Fort Wayne. We were established here in July 1st. And many of us were members of a team at Mental Health America previously to that. So our heart is just with mental health awareness, and really working with schools and caring for everybody that's affiliated with schools. So it all trickles down to youth, but we really want to work with youth. We work with educators. We work with parents. We try to really educate people on, mental health is a part of your body. Just like, we teach CPR, why not teach QPR? So QPR is question, persuade, refer, and it's a model of suicide prevention. So we do a lot of, just in a nutshell, suicide prevention at the core, but really we build community and connection and just inclusiveness. So social, emotional wellness, essentially. So that's what I do on those two agencies. And then I also run a support group for those who have lost someone to suicide. It's called We the Living, and that is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I have lost 3 people to suicide. I lost my best friend when I was 15. I lost my father at 17, and I lost my cousin Emily 6 years ago. So taking care of those left behind and knowing how isolating that type of grief is just really important for me. And so I love to give back by giving my time and energy into that space as well.
What was the moment that you were like, this needs to be my path? Did you have that moment, or was it just a gradual, you found yourself there?
I really want to say at 19, that was my moment. Actually, in college, I wanted to completely change my major to like psychology or something. And I just kind of pushed through because, you spend so much money on college and it's like, well, I'm almost done. I should just finish. So I finished and I taught first grade. And while I love teaching and I loved that, I really want to say when I became a mom, something clicked in me where I was like, I want better for my daughter. I want a world where it's okay to talk about mental health. I don't want the stigma. I want a world that we value our mental health just like any other part of our body, and we normalize it so that people don't feel isolated and they don't feel like, well, this is taboo. I have to live this in secret, and then ultimately, end up feeling more isolated through that. So I would say, God, for me personally, I have a strong faith. God opened a lot of doors right around that time. And it was just like, this is where I need to be. And I do get asked all the time, why don't you go back to teaching? And I'm like, but I am teaching. And the great aspect of both of my jobs is that I can teach basically kindergarten through 12th grade and adults with this job. And it's never the same thing every day. So for me, I just feel like this is where God has me. And I don't know if that'll be forever, but I feel like my heart will kind of always be forever in this field of trying to advocate for others and teaching people how valuable they are.
Well, I mean, just to talking with you about some of these things in the past really changed and impacted my life. And I just felt like just hearing your perspective about some of these things, like taking a CBR class and taking a choking class, for when you have a baby, you pray that these things never happen. But unfortunately, it's a sideswipe. It's a lot of times something that it just is, sometimes bad things happen, not great things happen. And I think that the more and more people are equipped with knowing how to navigate it, like see signs and know what to do and know how to point people in a direction for help is really important, because like our parents' generation, and especially the generations before that, did not talk about this stuff. It was always in hushed tones. And if somebody took their life, you did not talk about it. Like it was so like this shame around it.
Yes.
And now we realize that like people have heart attacks and they also have brain attacks where their just brain fails them. And how do help somebody if you can in that moment? And how do you help people who have lost someone in that moment? I think these are really important conversations to have, especially with somebody who's a professional like you. For me, being a mom, and if you've gone through any kind of trauma or any kind of super low moment, I think that probably all of us are confronted with some of these thoughts and feelings, and it's normal and there's a way to navigate it. So all that to say, you talked about respect and QPR. So what are some of the things that you teach kids and people to look for in other people and in themselves, and where to go for help?
So basically, if we're talking about, I mean, really, it doesn't even have to be that maybe they're suicidal, but just noticing that maybe they're going through a mental break, or they're having a time in their life where they are very fragile, or maybe they're realizing that they need to unpack something, maybe that they've had childhood trauma or something that they've kind of pushed down. Because you're absolutely right. For generations and decades, people have just swept everything under the rug, and it's like that elephant is like sitting on your chest now, like, and people
Yeah.
ignore it. But any behavioral changes that are drastic, so that can even be an upswing. Because sometimes people, when they've made the decision that they are going to end their lives, they almost have a relief. I know the day before my dad took his life, he was in a wonderful mood. He had been in this awful, looking back, I was only 16 and I didn't realize this, but what I believe was like a manic, just bipolar low. And then all of a sudden he had this great day. And I remember thinking like, oh, well, maybe he's like coming out of this. And the next day he took his life. So sometimes when those drastic mood changes go up and down and they're really elevated, that's something to note. Obviously, if somebody's typically outgoing and then all of a sudden they're isolating themselves, they're not texting you back, they're not answering their phone, they're canceling, appointments or dates with people, or not going to holidays or special events or things like that. That's a huge one. Another one could just be possibly starting to plan out things long term that maybe they didn't before. Maybe saying things like, hey, if something ever happens to me, or giving a prized possession away. Almost, when you hear somebody say, like, hey, if I've ever wronged you, or things like that, those are some key things to kind of notice. And I would say another big one would be just the way that they're speaking. So we all have our frustrated days. We all have rough days. But if somebody's like, I just don't want to do this anymore, I feel stuck, I don't think I can go on, or it's, I'm too tired to breathe. Those are obviously kind of indirect signs. And I would say the biggest thing is, if you feel like somebody might take their lives, ask them. And it's so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable to do. One thing that we do in QPR is that we role play that, and it's uncomfortable. Everybody hates it. The teens that we work with hate it. The adults hate it. But it's one of those things that it's so vastly important. So we try to have you say the word suicide because it's uncomfortable, and I get that. But then we also give you other things that you can say. So if you just can't say, hey, are you thinking of suicide? What you could say is, are you thinking about taking your own life? Are you thinking about ending it all? Like, you really want to have the permanence there. And the reason why you want to make it permanent is you don't want to say, are you thinking of hurting yourself or self-harm or harming yourself? Because some people engage in self-harm as a coping mechanism, especially teens and teen girls. So if you have someone who's never self-harmed and you ask them, are you thinking about hurting yourself? But they're really thinking about taking their life, then it puts them in this headspace of like, okay, well, I can be honest and say, I'm not thinking about hurting myself. And that's not technically lying to the person that just asked me. It's like they're scapegoat. So when you're really direct, that's the best approach. And 9 times out of 10, if they are thinking about it, it's going to be a sigh of relief for them. You're not going to put the idea in their head. That's one of the biggest myths with suicide, is that, don't say the word. Like, if you say that word, you're going to give them the thought. And that's just not true. I mean, they're either thinking about it or they're not thinking about it. And so a lot of times, if they are thinking about it and you go ahead and say the word for them, like, are you thinking about suicide? Or are you thinking about taking your life? And you've just given them this, like, I can say yes, because they said the word for me. Like, they took that off my chest. So, but then what do you do? Right. Then there's the horror of, oh my gosh, they said yes. What do I do? So
feels
even
like this weight of like, oh my gosh, is this person's life literally in my hands? That's
right.
Heavy.
Exactly. So the first and foremost is to take a deep breath. Like, make sure that you're in a safe surrounding, making sure that you're in a more intimate setting. You obviously don't want to ask somebody in a public setting, making sure that they are safe. So, like, let's say you ask them on the phone, trying to get to them, or getting access to, is somebody with them? Like, where are they? Trying to get as much information on the setting as possible. And then, honestly, even myself, having the losses, having the trainings that I've had, I'm not a counselor, right? Like, I am not a crisis intervention trained person. So I need to hand them off now at this point to someone else. So the goal is to do that, but it's to do it in a way that they don't feel completely isolated in it. You really want to try to give them as much control as possible. So let's say this is your friend, you could say, hey, what I really think is best for you, have you thought about this? Have you thought about therapy? Have you thought about talking to somebody who's more of an expert in this field? A lot of times they're probably going to say no, or I don't want to. And that's when you can offer to, like, hey, I get it. It's uncomfortable. Would it help if I went with you to the first session? Or would it help if I made that phone call? Or maybe you could just even do that ahead of time. Like, hey, I made some phone calls. I've got an appointment scheduled for you next Monday. I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to take you, and I'll just sit in the waiting room, or I'll sit in the vehicle outside, or whatever the case may be. But you want to try to give them as many choices. But honestly, you really need to get them to a therapist, to someone who really can help, and to assess, like, do they need medication? What's the next step? Now, that's where, if you've just had a conversation and you feel like they're not in grave danger, that's pretty doable. But if you feel like, nope, right now, like, they're going to hurt themselves if they're not watched 24 hours a day, or they're not in a setting where they are safe, calling 911 is always the best. So again, I tell teens that, a lot of them don't want to snitch on their friend. And I always try to tell them, like, your friend will get over it. I promise you, someday they'll come back to you and they'll thank you.
Yeah.
But you'd rather have your friend be mad at you
And with
not,
you.
yeah, and not gone.
Yeah.
So, if it's 3 a.m, your friend is texting you this stuff, like, you need to call 911. And at the end of the day, again, sometimes maybe you were wrong and maybe really they weren't, serious about it, but you just don't know and you can't take that risk. We have to take every single time that someone says it as this is the reality. Because a lot of students will say, like, well, what if my friend's doing this for attention? At the end of the day, if that's the kind of attention they're seeking, they still need help. Yeah. It doesn't matter if they're not truly suicidal. Like, they legit need help in some way. And it's okay to need help. I think that's the biggest part, is the biggest push. If I could have 30 seconds, to get everybody in the world to listen to me, it would just be, you are worthy of getting help. You are valuable. It's okay to get help. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's just, you need somebody to help you sort out your emotions. Like, big feels are legitimate. Like, have somebody just work out your feels with you.
Absolutely.
So what does QPR stand for again?
So QPR is question, persuade, refer. And that is something that's, really internationally known. So again, I know that, we're in different states, but if anybody just Googles QPR and then they put their state or their zip code, behind it, they should be able to find someone who is able to do it. They do offer it virtually. They do offer it in person. Obviously, I'm going to say in person is the best setting, just because it is a very uncomfortable topic that you're going to be discussing. And there's an element to it that in person, I think it sticks a little bit better, kind of like CPR. If you're going to do CPR virtually, it's just a little different because you really want to try to be as hands-on as possible. But it's a great program. Another resource that is just kind of more international would be the AFSP.org, and that stands for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And that is a phenomenal resource. It has postvention, so that's the aftercare after a suicide. It gives you statewide resources. Again, you can put in your zip code. It will tell you what support groups are in your zip code area. And then they have prevention tools there. And then they have the intervention in the middle. Okay, my friend said that they want to take their life. What do I say now? There's scripts that you can find. It's just a tremendous resource for anybody, anywhere.
So you've created something called We the Living. What is that? Is that just something that is Fort Wayne based, or is that kind of becoming like a national thing people can tap into?
So We the Living is only Fort Wayne based. However, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has something called Healing Conversations. And that is a support group system that is again, kind of nationally, or I believe it could be even international. I'm not as well versed in Healing Conversations, but those are support groups that, again, are kind of nationwide. So We the Living is one that was actually started, back in the 1980s here in Fort Wayne by a man, Phil Staggerwald, who's a well-known name here in Fort Wayne. Mary Radowski and Lois Hamilton. Those are the three names that come to mind that started the group because of the stigma, because suicide grief is like an onion. There's so many layers to it, and you're grieving two separate griefs. So you're grieving just the person who died, like any normal grief, but then you're grieving how they died and the stigma that's wrapped up in that. The awful words, the things that are said. I can't tell you how many times I've had people say, your dad went straight to hell, right? Well, if he died from a heart attack, nobody would ever say that to me. So the reality is that group sadly is needed. And I started attending that group back in 2003 when I was 17. My mom drugged me there, and I was like, I don't need a support group. And here I am, the head of the whole thing. So the great part of it is that it's peer-based. So that just means, obviously, I've had a lot of formal training at this point, but I'm not a counselor. But I'm somebody who has literally gone on this journey, and I'm just trudging forward a little bit farther than most people who are in my group. I'm here to remind them that you will make it through this. It might be 1 second at a time, but you're going to. And one day you're going to look back and be like, I don't even know how I got here, but I'm here. And I think it just gives people a safe space to know they're truly not alone, because some people will come, and it is sad, that stigma that you were talking about earlier. They have said, like, if my family knew I was here, or my family wants to say that it was a heart attack. And in that room, they don't have to lie. They can say, yeah, my brother took his life, or my dad took his life, or my son took his life, my daughter took her life. Like, that's the reality for me. Now, what do I do? So,
Is it even possible to navigate that kind of a loss in a healthy way without having a group supporting you?
I mean, I think it absolutely is. I think it's a very personal journey on what you choose to use through, to trudge through your own grief. A lot of people tend to use therapy. A lot of people use therapy in conjunction with our group, which I think is great, because I think then you have the one-on-one personal, like what you said, kind of unpacking. Sometimes hearing someone else just take what your reality is, or your perception of reality, and play it back to you, can be so therapeutic, because then you start to piece things together, and you start to notice things, the way that you say and do things, or the way that person said or did things. And I think it's just helpful and beneficial. So for me, a support group isn't for everyone, but I do think the people that attend, they get the sense that they're not alone, in a way that isolating yourself, or just trying to just only do therapy, it's a little bit, haven't had that loss. And I feel like there's just something about having the common bond of, oh, I get what you've been through because I've been through it. So again, it's always my recommendation that people try it. I always say, try us 3 times. If you don't feel like we're a fit, try something else.
The 3
but I always,
for life.
yeah. So, and I just always urge people to find other things. We go through coping skills and all that stuff in our group, and just try to figure out what works for you. And that might be, different things that don't work for me. But at the end of the day, if they work for you, that's great. And I will say, just because I know that we are in a different state. So We the Living, you can go to We the Living, F as in Frank, W.org. And there's links there. We do run virtually as well. So we do a hybrid. So like right now we have an attendee from Florida. So again, just because we're based in Fort Wayne doesn't mean you have to be in Fort Wayne to utilize us. If this resonates with you and you're like, hey, I want to try it out, no cameras required. If you just want a safe space where you can kind of listen to other survivors, we're totally open to that too.
Well, and I just feel like, even if you just said, I'm just going to try it once, it could really be such a benefit. Because if you're talking about anything else, if you've just had a baby and you're talking to a mother, like, they're just voicing things that you go, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one, or being able to articulate something that you weren't able to wrap your mind around yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it helps bring you to peace and closure of how to, like, that you're not alone, and that you're not crazy, and that it's real. And here are some ways that we've gotten through it. Like you were saying, like, I think that if somebody has gone through a loss to suicide, like checking out a group like yours, at just saying even just once, I feel like would really help. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we have a rule that you don't have to talk in our group. And it's funny. I mean, one family, it took them like 9 months before they ever really said anything other than their names. And I used to wonder, like, are they getting anything out of this group? But they said, like, every time we came, we didn't speak, but we heard other people that did exactly what you kind of just said, where like they worded something so eloquently that we could not get our brains to kind of put that into words. So that helped us move forward to finally get to the point where we were able to speak about it. So it is one of those things. Even, I mean, I have been at facilitating for almost 19 years, and I still will have moments where someone says something and I'm like, oh, That's like perfectly said. I've always wanted to say that way, but I just could never get it out. So I mean, I still benefit from it as well. Like it's just a journey. Um, and I'm here to be with those people for however long that they want to. Because I mean, certain support groups tend to have different models, and my model is very however long you need us. If that means you come once a year, great. If that means you come for 9 years, great. If that means you come every other month for 25 years, I don't care. Like, I'm here to be on this journey with you. I'm never going to give you a timeline. I'm never going to tell you that it's time for you to do anything different, because the reality is only you know what you need, and I'm just here to walk that with you.
Is there anything else, Jen, that you like? Is there a question that I haven't asked that you wish, like something that would add, or is there anything else basically that you think you need to say?
So I would just say again, if you are concerned about yourself or someone else, just know that it's okay to not be okay, but you can't sin in that. Like, we all have our bad days, but it's something different if we're having bad weeks and bad months and bad years, and we just feel like we just can't catch our breath emotionally, or we just can't push through anymore. It's okay to say, you know what, I need help. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm here to tell you I would give anything for the three people that I lost to have just put up the white flag and say, I surrender, I need help. And a couple resources I want to give. So the one that adults might resonate most with is 1-800 273 TALK. And that is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's a great song by Logic, too. If you want to understand suicide in a nutshell, listen to that song. Um, but you can call them 24 hours a day and just have a safe space to talk. If you are suicidal, or if you are in crisis, or if you're just going through some stuff and you don't know where to start unpacking it, start with them. It's completely anonymous. But for teens and for people that just don't want to be on their phone, because some of us, the phone rings and we might stare at it like, why couldn't this have been a text, right? Um, you can text 741 741, just 24 hours a day. It's a crisis line. Again, completely anonymous. I test all of these lines out just because I don't ever want to give out information that I wouldn't use. So when I say they're anonymous, they are. I've tested them. But long story short, you can unpack stuff 24 hours a day, 365, with a trusted adult on the other line. I say that because some teens, if they're listening, might not have that, but they have that on that line. And again, the great part is it's anonymous. Like, you don't have to see someone's face. They don't have to know your name. It's just, hey, I just need to talk to someone right now. And then they'll give you tips. I mean, ultimately, if you want to know resources, they're going to give them to you. So, yeah.
And you were saying that in June of 2022, there was going to be like a 911 number for suicide?
Yes, so it'll be a crisis line. It'll be 988. That'll be a national number. It has been a good decade of trying to get the money for that and get all of the, how getting a bill passed is. So right now they're just having a struggle with staffing it. So they can't make it live until they've staffed it. So hopefully by, I believe, July of 2022, it'll all switch to 988. So you'll get the same people that you get on that 1-800-273 talk number, but it'll be a little bit more localized. That way that the people, when you call in, you'll be able to get better information, more local information. And again, 20, 30 years down the road, people will know that 911 is for, if you fall off a ladder and break a leg, and 988 is for, I'm having a mental health crisis and I need to be dealt with differently. Because again, 911, you're going to get police. 988, you're going to get social workers and counselors and people that are trained to deal with those things differently, because those are two very different things.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate you having this conversation. It's so needed, and I just honor you, and I think so highly of you, how you have walked through all that you have walked through and find the strength to just give out light to other people. It's humbling, and I'm just so glad that we're related, because maybe that will pass over to me somehow.
Well, I absolutely love and adore you, and I just thank you for the opportunity to be asked. And same thing, I love that we're related too. So I feel like uh, there's strong females in this family, and I'm very glad to know that you're one of them, and to kind of walk through this crazy thing we call life together.
Yes, 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 yes. So everybody, I will link in the podcast notes and on YouTube and the captions all of the links that Jenn has talked about. I hope that this helps you and ministers to you, and just gives you some tools on how to navigate this super sacred place that used to have a garbage lid of shame over top of it, and it's not shame, it's just a sacred space. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you later. I hope you live a good life. I hope you live a good life. I hope you live a good life.